Namaskaram. Assalamu alaikum. So happy to be here. And then I'm so happy that I am the last speaker for this conference. As a last speaker, you have some liberties.
Recording in progress.
Extraordinary liberties. I'm very thankful to Vakkom Moulavi Foundation Trust, particularly Sajita Bashir ji, Hari Krishnan, and then my dear friend Dilip Menon, and also I'm so happy that I got an opportunity to meet long-time indirect friends, scholarly friends here in person. I also want to particularly share my gratitude to the wonderful team of both Vakkom Moulavi Trust and also the faculty and the students of University of Kerala. For the last 2-3 days, we know how much effort they are putting into this event. I love their hospitality. And then they made us, okay, come back again. Hopefully we will get more invitations from University of Kerala and then Vakkom Moulavi Trust. So before this is like, I made a change in my topic. So how this is, this is going to be a concept, new Muslim women. But before that, as a premise for my talk, when Vakkom Moulavi's nephew, M.A. Shakur, arrived at Aligarh Muslim University, everyone was so surprised that Shakur didn't know any Urdu. And his friends, classmates, they questioned him, what sort of a Muslim are you? If you don't know Urdu, you are not a Muslim. That is the North Indian perception of Muslimness. I'm going to take the same question, but narrow down it to gender discourse as reflected and represented in the case of Hyderabad princely state. And my question would be, what sort of a Muslim woman are you? So the entire presentation is a response to this question. Before I get into this topic, I take this opportunity to emphasize the urgency of understanding various threads of connected histories of the South Indian Muslim communities. In many ways, most importantly, their conceptual journey through a paradigmatic shift through 1900 to 1947. Rather than focusing heavily on the solitary journeys, making Telugu Muslims, Tamil Muslims, and Kerala Muslims as separate entities, we need to understand that there is a commonality that connects these languages, these communities, particularly Muslim communities. During my field research and archival research in the princely state of Hyderabad, I'm taking you to a different state, princely state of Hyderabad, I realized that we could comprehend the contours of such an elaborate discourse by reading literature as historical documents. So I aim at a double-edged search that highlights the story of connected histories on the one hand, and then a blend of history and literary spheres on the other hand. When learning about the life and work of Vakkom Moulavi in the history of Kerala Muslims and the rise of a renaissance, I started thinking that many aspects of his work in the public sphere, including language politics, Islamic reformism, Muslim identity as a dynamic aspect, the tensions between orthodoxy and orthopraxis, print culture, and the rise of modern prose, many such dimensions resonate with a version of the Hyderabadi modernity. I am emphasizing that term, Hyderabadi modernity, finding a continuity in the wake of the post 1992 Muslim resurgence in the Telugu and Urdu speaking states of Andhra and Telangana. This is another aspect that I am emphasizing. We often talk about Andhra and Telangana as Telugu speaking state, which I totally contest. We should use is Telugu and Urdu speaking state. Just like Shakur, nephew of Vakkom Moulavi from the late 1930s, we also see a new generation of Hyderabadi Muslims around 1940s joined the Aligarh Muslim University and returned home with a new set of discourses deeply grounded in modern Islam. To use Vakkom Moulavi's term, Islam Navi Karanamu. This South India's dialogue with Aligarh needs more nuanced understanding while connecting global and local modernities of Islam. The case of Hyderabadi princely state was much complicated as we encounter many non-Muslim Urdu writers. This is a very important aspect of Hyderabadi literary culture. Non-Muslims writing in Urdu and then Muslims writing in Telugu, who successfully and conveniently negotiated between Urdu and Telugu public spheres. In many ways, as I argued in my recent book, Remaking History, there is no way that we can separate Telugu and Urdu public spheres. In addition, many times these non-Muslim Urdu writers, along with many Telugu writers, never hesitated to acknowledge Urdu as their cultural model in developing a Telugu version of literary and cultural modernity. And then they use the word Renaissance in that context. Premised on this composite culture, there has been a steady rise of new Muslim-centered concepts and cultural movements in the history of Hyderabad. Today, I will focus on an idea of new Muslim, Naye Musalman. That's the category they were using in Hyderabadi context. In Telugu, they say Kotta Muslimlu, Navina Muslimlu. Within this larger category of new Muslim, but it is always, we never, even in scholarly discussions or in public discourses, we never discussed about the role of women, particularly Muslim women. So that is, in 1940s, late 1940s writings, we find that many Muslim and non-Muslim writers, they were using this term very specifically, Naye Aurat, Naye Musalman Aurat, new Muslim women. So this paper is just to talk about how this idea of new Muslim women works in various discourses. So this is what I was trying to introduce today. Between 1900 and 1940s, we witnessed a progressive shift. This is what Ilyas Bhai was talking about in his previous paper, Purogamana Vadam. But in Telugu, we use Abhyudaya Vadam, is a Sanskrit term. Of course, Purogamana is also Sanskrit, which was barely discussed by any mainstream literary or social histories. But within these mainstream histories, both particularly in Telugu histories, we never spoke about the participation of Muslims, even though Muslim participation was huge starting 1900. So there is, I also believe that because there is also a fear of Islam as far as this public sphere is concerned, because of the rule of Nizams and then his ways of approaching the people. So they were like scared to talk about Islam. And then I feel that we need to acknowledge the place of Islam within the debate on modernity. Literacy, gender, and political dimensions. So these are like three dimensions I was trying to explore throughout my career. And then lastly, and in today's presentation, I want to emphasize on the dimension of urbanity. So if you talking about Hyderabad as a cosmopolitan city, what are the features of urbanity that intervene into public discourse and the making of individuals? But even within this gender discourse, even within this urban discourse, we need to talk about gender as a big concept. So please note, I'm using these paintings because I am actually trying to market my future work. That's about visual Muslims and visual cultures. So these paintings are like produced and circulated after the 1950s, Hyderabad. So they demonstrate, they display different aspects of Muslim identity. So this is the area I am trying to focus on mostly. So my work, I use largely Telugu resources, but I also use Urdu resources as they are connected to their Deccani identity. And then the previous work published with Oxford University Press in 2013, the Festival of Peers, Muharram practices, but I didn't focus on Muslim practices there. I focused on Hindu practices of Muharram. So then I realized that we need to understand the connected histories of Muslims and Hindus within this public sphere. And then the larger idea throughout my work is to see how these different dimensions redefine South Indian histories. So some of you, I think, I don't know how familiar you are with this military action in Hyderabad between September 13th to 17th, 1948, when Nizam of Hyderabad was persistent, and then he rejected the idea of integrating Hyderabad princely state into union government. The union government under the leadership of Nehru, of course, is a major initiative by Sardar Patel rather than Nehru. So they ended up with this military invasion. But in popular terminology, it is called police action. But in ordinary vocabulary, they still use the word Sainika Charya, means military invasion. So it is actually so the police action, when I published the book with the same title, 1948 Police Action in the Muslims of Hyderabad, most Hyderabadi Muslims why you are trying to impose official authoritative vocabulary, use it like it's a governmental vocabulary, police action. Military invasion is a popular term. But I kind of gave an explanation. This is a popular term as well. Most Muslims and Hindus, they use police charya, police action rather than military invasion. During this, just in 4 days, this military killed 27,000 to 40,000 Muslims in Hyderabad's princely state. This is according to the report, Sundar Lal report, commissioned by the Nehru government. The government actually made this report confidential because that revealed so many secrets about this violence. And then 100,000 Muslims and Hindus too migrated to Pakistan and other parts of the world. Some Muslims migrated to USA and Europe, particularly after 1950s. I met some of these migrant Muslims in Chicago and Los Angeles, and then I did some field research there as well. But the fact is that, according to Sundar Lal Committee report, this number is 27,000 to 40,000 killings. That's just Muslim killings. But from my field research, I heard that it's not just Muslims. It's also non-Muslims. Because Nehru's political ideology, even though he says he uses the terminology of socialism, but in practice, Nehru subscribed to this anti-communist ideology, and then those who were killed, some of them were like communists from different caste groups in Hinduism. So this was the picture from the police action, military invasion in 1948. So actually the Life magazine published a special issue in 1948, immediately after this violence. And then Times also published a special exclusive story about this violence. But most of the Times particularly subscribed to the governmental vocabulary, and then they just used whatever Nehru government kind of issued as official statements. While the Life magazine actually published popular statements as well. So this is very important. The media announcements, media politics also played a crucial role in the making of Muslim identity in Hyderabad Princely State. So the big discussion during this point, this is the map that shows how military invaded Hyderabad Princely State from different directions on each day, 13th to 15th September. And then you can see how the military, from all directions, all kinds of militaries, cavalry, Punjab Army, Jodhpur, Sikh, company police, and then all kinds of, they used every kind of military to invade Hyderabad Princely State. But the big discussion was about, some people, particularly Congress viewpoint, it's liberation. And this was a statement given in one of the literary short stories. The title is Yugantam, End of an Era. When I heard that the police action had begun, it was as a great feel as if some huge burden was removed, and there was a deep exhilaration that we would all be liberated from these chains. But very soon, we are wrapped in a new fear about local Muslims, underline that usage, who have been quiet and peaceful until now. So until police action, Muslims were peaceful and quiet. Of course, even immediately after the police action also, they were quiet and peaceful. But there was this Islamophobia, the fear of Muslim identity. So fear of Muslim dressing, fear of Urdu language. So that all led to a kind of anti-Muslim sentiment. We are scared that these Muslims, unable to stand the attacks from the Indian army, would be forced to wage a war like cats caged in a room. That's a statement given by a non-Muslim. He was describing the life story of his Muslim friend and then talking about how he was in a dilemma whether to accept this Muslim person as a friend or not. Is he a friend or enemy? That was a big question at that point. So this idea of liberation, for some of them, is a political liberation from the Nizam's rule. And of course, BJP actually politically in 1998, the 50th year of this police action, they celebrated this. So the question was, how could you celebrate this 50,000 Muslim killings? Right? They started using the term again, liberation, celebrating the liberation. And then Muslim groups raised a voice against it in 1998. But the incident itself, in 1948, it was called, because it was happening the same time Israel and Palestine issue was happening, and then they were using the term Hyderabad Holocaust to describe, characterize the entire violence, and then the Hyderabad massacre. So on the one hand, you are talking about Hyderabad Holocaust, killings of Muslims, and then marginalization of Muslims. On the other hand, the BJP was supporting and celebrating this as its liberation. Right? It's a political, it became a political tool after 1998. So what should we do against this background? Because we don't have sufficient documents, historical documents, and the one and only report, Sundarlal Committee's report, it was made confidential and a secret document. And then when I started the field research, the only evidence I had was these personal narratives. So I met like 150 Muslims and non-Muslims who witnessed the violence between September 13th and 17th. Some of them were the family members of those who were killed. And then some of them were like activists. So rather than, but what I tried to most times in literary histories, we read literature, poetry as poetry, short story as short story, like that, right? But I kind of challenged that idea. We can't read literature just as literature. There is no such thing as art for art's sake, right? And then literature for literature's sake. So I actually read them as social documents, historical documents, but most importantly, in the context of police action, I read them as political documents, because most of the literature published in the late 40s and until late 50s, most of them, they were talking about Muslims of Hyderabad. And then these are the sources that I was using. And then lastly, conceptually, I focused on the question of urbanity and then this new Muslim. But within this new Muslim, okay, this is one thing that I wanted to share. So we were talking about this urbanity. Unfortunately, I don't smoke, but those who had the experience of smoking, they all know about this Charminar cigarette. So that's a terrible, I don't subscribe to that idea of masculinity expressed in that, but you can see this is showing the public face of industrial life and the rise of leftist politics. So because there were so many cigarette factories around Hyderabad, there was also trade unionism. And then there was also leftist activism. And then Maktoum Mohyuddin was one of the prominent leftist leaders who came out of this particular intense movement. So it was marked by the emergence of a new working class, with a middle and lower middle class Muslims and Hindus. So once the Nizam's government fallen, so Muslim status changed. And then all those like upper class Ashrafi Muslims, they became like Azlafi Muslims. And then they became lower middle class or like totally lower class. So that actually made Hyderabad city as a fort of new working class. So this also marked the beginnings of new angry young generation of angry young men and women. And this is where actually the relevance of Vakkom Moulavi's work comes, the print culture, because the newspaper, journalism. So this was the movement when the rise of fearless journalism, impacted by Urdu and Telugu newspapers. So they started publishing stories about ordinary Muslim life. And then, of course, that also witnessed communal riots, and then they still continue. But the most important for us is to look at within this public sphere, how do we understand Muslim women? And the modernity, the kind of modernity these Muslim women represented. So, but quite interestingly, male writers in the late 40s also, they also wrote about women, particularly Muslim women. They also wrote about sectarian violence between Sunnis and Shias. They also wrote about how Sunni Muslim women are different from Shia Muslim women. So, but my problem with such literary writings is that they are still like from the male gaze, right? They look at the events. They look at we were talking about private life of Janana life of Muslims. They look at that kind of life from the lens of masculinity. And then male gaze dominates the entire narration. But I actually wanted to remove that aspect and then see even male writers were also like at some point they were trying to bring this feminine sensibility into the narration. While women writers, of course, we don't have many writers at that point, but at least we have few writers. We have few writers writing in both Urdu and Telugu. They were talking about Muslim feminine consciousness. So this is one of the novels published actually in Urdu, but it became popular in Telugu. The Jilani Banu, Ivan Ghazal is translated into all these languages. The Palace of Ghazal, where she spoke about these four phases of new Muslim women: Chand, Ghazal, Kaiser, Kranti. So this is very interesting aspect, like how popular culture like defined the life stories of new Muslim women. So there is a character, Chand was a mere 7-year-old at that time, but remember the story of every film she saw. She was especially fond of Leela Chitnis. Some of you are familiar with Leela Chitnis in 1940s, right? So she became like a kind of icon for new Muslim women. And then also, so Chand's role models were her parents, paternal aunts, and then they were using their view, like mimicking Western modernity by using like sleeveless blouses, lipstick, and then high-heeled sandals, were generally frowned by Muslim families, traditional Muslim families. So this is category 2. And then Ghazal, these pictures are very important for me. So, so Ghazal was the next person who was following the same model provided by Chand. So these women, this entire novel is a portrait of these 4 women. They represent 4 dimensions of gender discourse in Hyderabad princely state. So the last person, Kranti, please note the name. It's a Hindu name. Kranti means revolution and then brilliance, right? So, so it's a Hindu-Muslim blend there. So ideally, the writer focuses more on the life story of these young women. And then this is the picture from Telangana armed struggle. Kranti joins Telangana armed struggle led by leftist parties. And later she also joins Naxalite movement. So that she represents the 2 phases of extreme leftist activism. So in conclusion, this is what I want to say. So this is the cover page of my book, 1948, the picture taken from 1948, when the reading public was active in both Telugu and Urdu. So these people like sitting outside a chai center and reading newspapers. They were prominent in the making of new reading public, new Muslim identity. Urbanity and class distinctions reshaped the identity of a Muslim women in this context. That's the most important aspect that I wanted to emphasize. And then she is not passive anymore, but a source of social activism and an agent of change and resistance. So this is quite opposite portrait of what traditional Muslim women, how the way traditional Muslim was described or characterized in traditional writings. So Janana, from Janana to political battlefield. So the voice of pluralism, diversity, and progressivism, Purogamanavadam, runs through all these debates. New Muslim women engages with modernity, social reformism, and also a decisive factor in a local matrix. This is the first time we hear about Muslim women participating in public sphere. So that started, the history starts at, of course, late 30s and then moves through late 40s and settles in 1950s. And then they converse with local and global at once. In the novel, not only with this novel, but other pieces written by women, they discuss, they connect their life stories with what is happening in the broader Islamic world. They speak about Egypt, Iran, Iraq, and Saudi, and all these like versions of Islam, they come into play in their discourses, along with the local and national politics. And then finally, the saddest part is, even after all these things, even after the formation of Telangana government, which speaks so much about Telangana Renaissance, the role of women still remains, Muslim women, unacknowledged. So there is so much to do there. I don't know. I believe this is the just beginning of that kind of work. I hope to see young generation scholars taking up different dimensions of Muslim gender discourse. I hope the day will come. वो सुबह तो दूर नहीं है. Thank you so much.